How's it going, Bleach fans? Today we got a lot of information on Bleach Soul Residence. We got a brand new SSR character coming out of Gin in his Bankai form, as well as an SR character for Rangiku. We don't have too much information on Rangiku, unfortunately, but we have a couple of pieces of information on our boy Gin. So the first thing I wanted to show you guys is summoning animation. We got a little bit of gameplay, and then we got a kit breakdown to talk about some of the different things. So if you guys don't know, this is going to be kind of leaked content. So if you're wanting to avoid spoilers, make sure to kind of skip and come back, I guess, whenever Gin comes out. But let's go ahead and jump straight into it. First thing I'm going to talk about is the summonings. I think these are kind of cool to show just because, it's a little interesting to see, what these characters are looking like when you get them. Obviously, he's in the Wako Mundo outfit. Super cool, super dope. He's in his Bankai, which I want to touch on a little bit, right? I want to touch on a little bit because I know a lot of people have been talking about the forms of these characters, right? A lot of people have been saying okay, what's up with the characters not getting, a Gin was just a Shikai, and then we get to a point where now he's in his Bankai, and where Aizen when he didn't have his glasses, and now he's just kind of Wako Mundo. I think it's one of those things where a lot of these characters are just going to be pretty far along in their kits, just because there's a lot of kits that need to be fully fleshed out, and a lot of these characters definitely need to have fully fleshed kits. There's a couple of characters like Ichigo, for example. Obviously, he's going to get a couple of different forms. We always have an MC that has a lot of forms in these games, like Goku and all that different stuff. But Ichigo is going to be one of those characters that have a ton of different stuff. And I think the reason for that is because they just want to have these kits as fleshed out as they can. And they're probably going to lead up to the war arc. And then basically from there, we're going to have different variations, maybe depending on the characters and where they're at, obviously. And I think that's kind of where they're going to go so far. Now, so if you have the Espadas, I think a lot of them are going to have their forms, their Resurrections, and they're going to have just different variations to kits. So we're not going to see a bunch of Grimjows. We're probably going to see one, right? And we're going to have him be able to do his different stuff, or at least ties to it. So with that being said, though, I am going to jump into Gin's gameplay. This is 30 seconds long, so I'm going to let it play, and then you guys will kind of talk about it and go over it. So there's no audio, unfortunately, so I'll probably be playing whatever, music or whatever. But he seems like a pretty quick character. He's not as flashy in terms of cutscenes and stuff as Hitagaya and Aizen, but I kind of like that. I kind of like a little bit. I don't really hate cutscenes. I think Aizen looks fantastic. Hitagaya is a lot of fun too. But I kind of like just bam, 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 just knocking out. Obviously, his ult has an animation. I would expect an ult to have an animation. That's kind of part of it. But he overall looks like just a fast character, dude. He's just a barrage of attacks. So the first thing I want to do is I want to break down some of the different stuff. So we'll start from the beginning. So first and foremost, I've seen a lot of people talking about this game, at least when it first came out. A lot of people were kind of upset with the fact that it only has one skill and ult, and then some sort of tie into some of the characters can do different things. For example, Gin here looks like he also has some sort of trigger bar here that he's able to, build as he progresses. It actually builds very, very fast. So basically by the end of this combo, it's pretty much already built. So I think that's the first thing they showcase. You can see how fast that thing is growing, dude. And then he actually uses it in this combination to do the last couple of attacks, and it's pretty fast, dude. So basically that's his full combo whenever you use his little bar down here. I don't know if maybe he holds the attack button. I'm not really sure how he triggers that fully. And then you can see that his skill actually has a couple of different triggers here. Now these are charges. He can actually charge his attack. He's the first character that I've seen to be able to charge attacks like this and be able to use them. So it's kind of cool. We'll get into his kit a little bit more because I actually have the breakdown and all that different stuff. So that's the next thing they show, though, is basically he's going to go into his skill animation here. And you can see as he's charging it, he does more and more damage, obviously. And then he ends up taking all of the stacks, basically. And now it looks like he does apply some sort of down here. You can kind of see as he's using it, you can see it stacking and corresponded to how many he's using down here. You can also see Rangiku down here, which makes me believe that she's playing some sort of part. You can kind of see this weird mist around Gin. Obviously, we don't necessarily know what she's doing in terms of buffing, but you can definitely see she's applied here. She obviously has some sort of buff or debuff or whatever she's doing to help him out and help him do some different stuff. We haven't really seen her kit yet, unfortunately. But yeah, you can see a little bit of that charge animation there. And then we have his ult. His ult is pretty flashy. I think it's kind of cool that he does the series. He opens his eyes and then he just hits you, dude. Bam! It does quite a bit of damage. 616,000 here. So this is probably, I would imagine, a maxed out character. Maybe doesn't have max core stuff and maybe doesn't have the weapon core all the way maxed out. Because I know some damage gets pretty damn high. So this is pretty good if it is just base. It's a little on the lower side, though, if it's, stacked out max character with everything you could possibly have on a character. But I do think it's pretty good overall with, for being an ult and stuff. And then the animation itself is, it's pretty good. I mean, honestly, it's pretty clean. I think a lot of it's kind of one of those things when you're playing games like this, when they're so fast and so quick to me, less is more sometimes. Having something a little bit more simplistic is a little bit better sometimes, because it just makes that getting back into the fight a little bit more fun. Like, that's one thing I really like about this game, is it just feels so like arcadey, and not in a bad way. Like, I don't mean arcadey in like a weird, like it feels low effort. It's more arcadey. It's like, I just want to keep like attacking. I just want to keep hitting. I just want to keep fighting. Like, that's kind of fun for me. So I've really been enjoying the game, and I'm happy that they've I feel like they're doing pretty well, dude. I feel like a lot of people had a lot of doubts with them, and it looks like they're doing pretty well. So let's go ahead and jump into his kit, though. I know a lot of you guys want to see that and have the breakdown of that. So this is going to be on LD Shop. They have a lot of stuff talking about basically his kit that got leaked. First and foremost, obviously, you guys know he's a thrust character. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but he's going to have a brand new mechanic called Impel, and his damage profile is basically built on building this and doing a high amount of damage based on that. So the first and foremost here, you need to understand his core passive. 100 blades is key to grasping his strength. So to trigger, Gin's attacks builds Impel points on enemies. Upon reaching 100 points, Impel triggers once, dealing instant damage equal to 400% of Gin's attack. So that's already really cool, but it actually stacks quite a bit based on his passives, which we'll talk about here in a second. The game changer, besides Gin himself, all allies, including Rangiku, Tozen here, etc., can apply 10 Impel points when they use their special attacks, techniques, battle skills, ultimates, or even counters. Hit an enemy 1 second cooldown. So the system core here, this means even when Gin is off field, your thrust allies can continuously build points for him, triggering high value follow-up damage. This perfectly synergizes with multi-core team rotation. So it's going to be one of those cool things where he's going to really excel, having some of his passives in some of the different ways that he's able to gain points by being off the field, by using rotations and stuff like that. So I think it's always fun whenever you're able to kind of mix and match characters and be able to get in and out of the field. It doesn't seem like he's going to take too much time being on the field to build up a lot of different stuff. Some of the characters obviously take a little bit of time, like Bankai Ichigo. He really wants to be on the field. So Gin seems like he obviously wants to be on the field. There's ways to obviously mitigate that with passives and just using certain characters, obviously, in the Thrush category. And here's just a couple of different things about his basic attack. A rapid 5-hit combo with a total damage of 820% attack. And here's the comparisons here. So you can see Hitagaya is here at 994%. That's max level. And then basically these are all max level up here, it says, but this one's level 7, and then this is max level, and Gin is pretty damn close. So Hitagaya looks like he's edging him out, obviously. But we got VL Ichigo, and this is kind of another leak as well. He looks like he's doing not too much damage. I'm kind of curious to see what happens with VL Ichigo and kind of going through his kit, but obviously it's a different discussion. But Gin's doing a lot of damage, dude. So it shows that Gin's base multiplier holds a clear advantage in standard forms, solidifying his foundation on the field as a main DPS. Additionally, each hit implies 35 Impel points and builds spiritual pressure for his special attack. Now his flash step, his dodge skill here, obviously you can trigger it by doing a perfect dodge. He gains 50% attack and 25% of movement speed for 4 seconds. And then he gets 1 technique point. So the technique point is what I was talking about for his skills. You build up to 3, and then you can use it by holding it. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that. Counter skill here, so he can counter, dealing a staggering 50% damage. This is obviously based on max level, and he applies 30 Impel points. So countering with him is going to help. He only has to get to 100, so obviously you only have to counter 3 times basically to be able to do that. That just depends on the situation. You're always going to want to counter basically whenever you can. But obviously it makes more sense for him whenever you're wanting to pay attention to that and build your points. And then you also gain 2 tech points. So on top of that, you're implying your Impel points, and you're also gaining the 2 techniques, high damage, and then you get your TP generation. It makes his counter a crucial part of his gameplay loop, obviously. So his next technique is going to be, or just his technique, is going to be entering a charging state. Like I was saying, he enters that charging state, consumes 2 technical points to increase the skill's final damage. Now this is the huge kicker, dude. Gin is invincible during the charge, releasing the attack when TP is depleted. Dude is invincible here. He just nope, I'm going to do this attack, and you're going to take it. So technique points are attained, like I said, perfect dodge, successful counter, and the most reliably by triggering Impel. His passive gains 1 GP per trigger, 100% chance. We'll talk a little bit more about his passives here in a minute, but obviously perfect dodge, successful counters. are going to help you in building your points, and then you're just going to have a rotation of basically using that technique as you do that when it's off cooldown. This is the game's first charging technique. While its exact multiplier is unknown, the invincibility, yeah, it's crazy, dude. The invincibility alone is crazy, and then just having a different technique is pretty cool. Now this is going to be for his ultimate, closes in a multiple thrusts before unleashing a final blow. This is faster than a Shikai, so obviously we saw that in the little demo that I showed you. It deals devastating damage equal to 300 or 3,625% of his attack, and implies a massive 50 points. So obviously that's half the gauge. So if you're already at half, that's 100% of your gauge. If you're not, you're like at 0, that's going to be 50. So it's one of those things, if you're mid-maxing it and you're trying to use like the most you would possibly use, there's scenarios where maybe you're like 75 points and maybe you want to find different ways to do it to be able to use it. And then you use your ult, then you can get another 50. So it kind of just depends on the context of what you're trying to do when you're fighting. But I can definitely see some different scenarios where you're building up that, impel points super fast based on the way that you're doing it, how you're min-maxing and using your ultimate. It's pretty nasty. And then this just kind of goes over the attack multiplier, obviously with VL Ichigo. Again, speculation on that guy and some of the different stuff that they've data mined. Looks like he's not going to be 100% like a DPS or kind of where he's fallen. Obviously, he has 300 or 3,000% here with his estimated level at 10, and then Gin's at 36.25%. So obviously he's doing a lot of damage, dude. he's a big burst damage, dude. It kind of looks like maybe he'd be really good at boss fights. I haven't really seen any evidence that maybe he'd be doing a lot of AoE. It does look like maybe his skill when he like impels and like kind of goes into it, that could possibly be like, AoE going around, but it definitely looks like he's doing a lot of like single target damage. Beyond his core passive, 3 bonuses passive escalate his Gin's output basically. So this is what I was talking about. His passives are pretty dope, dude. It gives you a lot of damage pretty quickly. So the first one is Disguise. Each time impel triggers, gain 1 technique point. That's what we were talking about a little bit during that technique point accumulation. And then this just gives you a little extra way basically to get your like ammo for his supplied charge technique. Now this next one is pretty cool. So when an ally's battle skill or technique hits an enemy, increase damage dealt by impel by 60%. Okay, so if you remember, you actually get impel points by being switched off and using their battle skill and technique anyway. On top of that, you get damage dealt by impel by 60%. So you can amplify your impel damage by switching off. So if, for example, you're like at 80 or something like that and you use a technique and an ultimate on one of your characters, your other characters, and then swap back to Gin, you're getting a 60% smack, dude. Like, it's going to be pretty damn good. And then you tie that with this one, which is going to be damage dealt by impel is increased by 150%. So basically, whenever you do this, you have these 2 passives, you're doing it quite a bit. And they did the calculations here, so it looks like it's 1240 for the percentage of attacks, and that's just for an automated follow-up. So obviously some different ways that you can get into it, like I was talking about with ultimates. Whenever you're using the way that you can scale up your impel points basically pretty fast, you might be able to do multiple iterations of this. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think he's going to be a pretty good character. So this is like the actual team that they are talking about. Basically, Tozen is really good for Gin just because obviously they help build out the impel points. But the other thing is Tozen has his wound effect thing, which goes pretty hand in hand with what Gin's trying to do. So if you don't have Tozen, this team would obviously still work. You can still use another strike character, but Tozen's just going to help because he has his added own benefit to do it. And then Rangiku, obviously we haven't seen too much of her stuff. I know that she applies some sort of effect on the field. You saw it during that gameplay. But it's just going to be one of those things where it's like, I mean, Tozen's probably going to be the best sub-in basically. But you could probably get away with like, I think Ikaku maybe. I can't remember if Ikaku's thrust or not. Actually, I think he is, right? I don't have him. I just played a little bit of him. I know he does quite a crazy amount of things, so maybe he could be a good substitute as well. I mean, honestly, you can play a lot of these teams. If you have a main DPS like Gin, then you can have like a sub DPS. Like a lot of the times, like having the wound effect for Tozen, like it's going to be nice, but it's not going to be one of those things where if you don't have him, you shouldn't pull on him. I recommend if you're going to pull on characters, you really just first off pull on the character because you like them. Obviously, we're all fans of Bleach, so you pull on the characters that you really, really like. And then there's some situations like Aizen, I feel like he was kind of a must-have, basically. But Gin's one of those characters where I do think he's going to do a lot of damage, dude. And if you don't have a good thrust team, I think he could definitely help build out that. And even if you don't have Tozen, he can definitely do it if you get like Rangiku, obviously, as you're pulling for Gin. She's going to be on the banner as well. So you obviously have half the team and you can substitute somebody in for that just to have the thrust team if you're kind of looking for that. But on top of that, he just seems like he's going to be very, very good for single target damage and boss stuff. So if you're looking for another character that's really high DPS, I think it could be definitely worth the investment. You obviously seen that he almost scales to Hitsugaya. However, if you have someone like Hitsugaya and Aizen and like Bankai Ichigo and Hat and Clogs and stuff like that, this might be one of those characters that maybe you can kind of get away with skipping. I know we have like Kenny on the upswing, probably Gimja at some point. Like obviously we're getting a lot of different characters, so it gets to the point where if you're free to play, this is where you have to kind of start making decisions on who you're skipping. And sometimes it's just because you want a different character. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're like, this character sucks. Like maybe you really like Kenpachi, maybe you like Gimja or like Grimjow, or somebody else. Like basically at this point it's like one of those recommendations that I could tell you then and then and then, but it's really just depends on your account and all that different stuff. But anyway, I personally am probably going to pull on him just because I'm a content creator. I want to obviously showcase him. If I don't get him, we'll showcase him in other ways. But anyway, guys, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and you look forward to the content. If you do, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're going to be posting all kinds of stuff about Bleach Soul Resonance, as well as Bleach Mirrors, High, whenever that comes out. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a good rest of your night, guys. Peace.